Masechet Nazir Daf Nun He, a short daf with two topics. We're going to complete our discussion of the impurity of foreign lands and Nazir going there. And then we're going to talk about the Nazir becomes a Mesorah and how he counts his days. So we began this topic yesterday, and in the Mishnah, this Mishnah mentions items, types of impurity that a Nazir, even if he becomes Tameh Met in these ways, it does not negate his previous days. He does not have to shave or bring korbanot. Okay, and some of these were even full-fledged tumat met, and some of them were lesser level, like this one, which is only midrabanan. So the rabbis came and said that other lands besides the land of Israel have a status of tum'ah. And we asked yesterday, what kind of tum'ah did they mean? Is it because of avira or gusha? If you say gusha, the land itself, so then this tumah is similar to regular tumat met, where you never know where there might be a grave, and sometimes they're not marked in foreign lands, they're not careful, or they destroy the markers, and so therefore we should suspect that there may be a cemetery in any place. And so because of that, it's the ground itself that would be a problem. But if you were not touching the ground, you'd be okay. We don't use tent impurity for this type of tumah outside the land. However, the other opinion said avira. No, the land, the atmosphere, the environment, the air of foreign lands, that's what's tameh. So this is not building upon a typical type of tumat met, which is when you're worried about graves, but rather this is more like a spiritual, a moral impurity of other lands. Right? Either way, it's encouraging people, especially Kohanim and the Nazir, and really anyone, to live in the land of Israel. That's a holy place, and the other lands have this impurity. But the exact nature of this D'Rabbanan, whether it builds on what is usually kind of corpse impurity, and that would be in the land, or it's just the whole atmosphere, and that would be concentrated in the air itself, the airspace. Okay, so we tried to prove one way or another from our Mishnah, but we're not successful. And now we're going to try to match up these two sides with a Tana'eric dispute. Lema ketana'eh, hanichnas l'eretz hamim b'shida, teva u'migdal. Rabbi metameh, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda metaher. My love, Rabbi savar mishum avira, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda savar mishum gusha. Let's propose that the two sides of the question earlier are parallel to the following two opinions in this Baraita about someone who goes to a foreign land in Chutz La'aretz in a chest, a box, or a cabinet. Yes, an unusual way of traveling, but if someone just happens to be in a box and they're being carried around or thrown, as we'll see in a second, in a foreign land, Rabbi says that person is impure. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda said that person is tahor. So what's the reason for the machloket? What's at the essence of their controversy? Let's assume that Rabbi, who is the one that said tameh, thinks that that's because of the air impurity, and Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda thinks that the source of foreign land impurity is from the ground. All right, let's explain that one first. If it's from the ground, then it's similar to corpse impurity, that when you have a grave, you can't be over the grave because the tumah is there. However, if you're contained in a box in a cemetery, then you're okay, because the box will protect you from it. We're going to use the term ohel in a second to describe the same scenario. Because in ohel is bad if the body is in the ohel with you, right? If you're in an enclosure with a corpse, then the impurity goes throughout and you're tameh. However, if the corpse is outside and you're in a box that's a size, that's a certain size or bigger, then that will protect you from the tum'ah. So if we're talking about a d'Rabbanan that's based on regular corpse impurity that's in the ground, then the box will protect you. And that's the opinion of Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi, however, says, no, this is the moral, spiritual type of impurity, and that permeates all of the air, the environment. And since you're in a box, but the box is in the air, and you're breathing the air, you're part of the place, right? It doesn't fit into the technical restrictions of ground impurity, it permeates all of the air, and that's why Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says tameh. Okay, so good. So now we're able to match up these two sides of the possibilities of how we think of this foreign land impurity may be the actual subject of the machloket between Rabbi Yosef ben Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi regarding traveling in a box. Okay, so this could work, but we don't want to necessarily pigeonhole each of the Tana to that he thinks only one thing. And so we say, not necessarily. We can explain this, and we're going to offer a couple of different explanations how we can explain that they both actually agree on the nature of impurity of foreign lands. So la dekula amamishum gusha. Maybe in fact everybody thinks that it's in fact because of ground impurity. Mor sabar ohel zaruk sheme ohel, mor sabar la sheme ohel. And what they're arguing about is whether a tent that is moving, is that still a tent and protects from impurity or not? So this tent that is moving, they shouldn't discuss what is zaruk. Literally means that it's thrown. Someone took a tent with a person in it and threw it, or it got maybe like an airplane or a rocket with someone in it. So it could be talking about that. It has to be totally not connected to the ground. Others say no, it could be that's something that some people are carrying. And that's still called ohel zaruk. The point is that it's moving. Okay, so let's just say that it's moving. So this box can act as a protection for sure if it's stationary, because then it's a significant enough structure, it's stationary, it has a certain size, that will protect. But if it's moving, then do you still consider that enough of a structure that it can protect? So, one opinion, Rabbi Yosef ben Rabbi Yehuda says, even if it's moving, it's still considered a tent, and it will protect from outside. That's why tahor. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, no, if it's moving, then it's not a tent anymore. It doesn't act as a tent, and it is physically a box, but legally it does not protect against tum'ah. But therefore, everybody agrees that the source of impurity is from the ground. If you're in a tent, good. But the question is a moving tent? Is a moving box considered a legal tent or not? Okay, so that seems to be a good answer. The problem is we have a braita against it. V'hatanya, Rabbi Yosef ben Rabbi Yehuda omer, tevashi mele'a kelim, uzrakaha al peneha met be'ohel, teme'a, v'imay tamunachat tehora. Rabbi Yosef ben Rabbi Yehuda, he's the one that said permitted, because he said a moving tent is not a tent. But here he says a box that has utensils in it, and it's thrown over a corpse in a tent. So you have vessels in a box, and this thing is in a tent, and the whole thing is moving. Tameh. But if it's placed in one spot, then if it's stationary, then tahor. You see that Rabbi Yosef ben Rabbi Yehuda himself does distinguish between stationary, then is considered a tent and protects, or moving. If it's moving, it does not have a legal status of a tent and does not protect, and those vessels inside will become tameh. So that the answer that we just said here is not possible to say that according to the Rabbi Yosef ben Rabbi Yehuda. So back to the drawing board, and Ela de kula ama mishum avida. We'll go to the other side and say everyone agrees that the impurity of Gentile lands is actually comes from the air, the whole environment. Umor savar kevan de la shechicha lo gazru be'rabanan. Umor savar afal gav de la shechicha gazru be'rabanan. And Rabbi Yosef ben Rabbi Yehuda, he says this is unusual. It's unusual to travel inside a box, and therefore the rabbis never made a gezerah in the first place. That's a general rule that the rabbis, when they make a gezerah, they want to prevent certain things. But they're only going to make a gezerah on common things that commonly occur. The things that don't commonly occur, since they're not common, so you don't have to worry about them too much, and so the rabbis don't make a gezerah. When the rabbi said that you become impure when you go to a foreign land, that they only made the gezerah if you're walking, traveling in a normal way in a foreign land. If you're in a box, nobody travels in a box. So for the two people that ever travel in a box, so yeah, they'll be okay, right? Maybe in an emergency you could really use that. So that's the reason. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said, no, even though it's not common, the rabbis still applied their gezerah. They made a blanket gezerah. Listen, anyone who's in foreign lands is going to be tameh no matter what. And even if you're in a box, still you become tameh, and everyone agrees it comes from the airspace. So that's why, according to the Yehuda Nasi, it doesn't matter if this is unusual. It doesn't matter if you're in a box, because the whole airspace becomes tameh, so therefore that person becomes tameh. Whereas the Yehuda think that the rabbis never applied the gezerah in the first place. So it's not that the box is protecting you from tum'ah, because the box doesn't protect from air tum'ah, but rather that the rabbis never applied the gezerah, their law, to someone in a box. And now we're going to actually prove that this is a good answer for the Yosef and the Yehuda, because v'hatanya hanichnas le'eres ha'amim b'shidat teva migdal tahor be'karon b'sfina b'iskariya tameh. This braita in fact supports this very distinction, because it says someone who enters a foreign land in a chest, a box, or a cabinet, they're okay, because that's an unusual way of traveling. Whereas if you go in a wagon, a boat, or a raft, here's a wagon that we're talking about, right? This is a usual way of travel. Lots of people travel in a wagon. So it's an enclosure, it's true, like a box, but this is a normal way. So if you go this way, or in a boat, and maybe the boat has a section that's closed off, so that's kind of like a moving box as well, but this is a normal way. So because it's a normal way of traveling, the rabbis did apply their law in that case, and therefore tameh. So, and even though you're in a box and you're moving, so this must mean airspace, and the only reason above is because it's a box or a cabinet. That's why it's tahor, because the rabbis did never apply their gezerah there. But if even Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Yehuda would agree that if you're in a box that's a usual type of box, like a wagon or a boat, then it would become tameh. Okay, so that's an acceptable answer. And then according to this answer, everyone agrees that it's from the air space. Or now we're going to go to the other side and say, actually, maybe everyone agrees that the impurity of foreign lands that the rabbis made is, in fact, from the ground. It's a type of ground impurity. And therefore, if you're in a tent, you should be fine. It will protect. But the controversy is, well, should we worry that a person is going to stick out his head and his body outside of the box, right? He's going to get claustrophobic in the box. He's going to want to get some air, and he's going to open the sunroof and pop out of it. And if he does that, then he will become tameh. So if he does that, certainly he will become tameh. The question is, should we make a gezerah that he may do that? So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi would say, yes. We worry that it's impossible. A person's not going to stay in the box the whole time. We assume that they're going to pop out, and then they become tameh. So therefore they said, no, don't go in the box at all. Even in the box, you'll become tameh. So that you don't try to go in a box. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda, son of Rabbi Yosef, says, no, it's okay. If you stay in the box, you're fine. If you leave the box, then you're going to be tameh. But if you stay in the box, we don't worry that you're going to come out of the box. And this also, we have a braita that supports it. V'atanya, Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda Omer, nichnas es hamim b'shidat teva migdal tahor ad sheyosid Hashem rosho o rubo. If someone goes into a foreign land in a chest, a box, or a cabinet, they are tahor. And so this is all assuming that everyone agrees that it's from the ground. And so everybody would say, in principle, because it's only ground impurity and you're in a box, you'll be fine. So that's why Rabbi Yosef is fine. He agrees that actually, if you leave the box with your head or majority of your body, just head or majority of the body, that will be sufficient. To see over here it says Rosho Verubo, sounds like both. Here it says Rosho Orubo, but the Vav can sometimes mean or. So we should probably interpret it as or, right? So if you put your head or most of your body out, then yes, you'll become tameh. But as long as it's inside, you're okay. So that's why the Rabbi says it's all right. And the Rabbi Nasi says it's impossible, very hard to stay in the box the whole time, and therefore even if you're in the box, we say you are tameh. And so now we've been able to explain this machloket in the Braita according along the lines of one says Gusha, one says Avira, or both say Gusha, or both say Avira. And so now we have lots of explanations of it. All right, fantastic. And now the Mishnah goes on and talks about a Mesorah. of a Nazir who becomes a Mesorah. Mesorah is Tameh, but not Tameh Lamet. So since he's not Tameh Lamet, he doesn't have to start. He doesn't have to start all the way again and shave and bring korbanot as a Nazir. Rather, he pauses his counting and does his Mesorah thing. The days that he's for sure Tameh, and then the days of his purification, he stops counting, and then after he's purified, he can restart, he can continue counting from wherever he left off. That's what the Mishnah said. Amar Rav Chisda, lo shanu ela benezirut mu'atet, avav benezirut merubeh, mislak nameh salkinan le. Rav Chisda puts a limit on this Mishnah and says this is only true if it's a short nezirut of 30 days. Then he continues counting from where he left off, and he cannot count the days in between when he was a Nazir. The idea is that he has to let his hair grow. So if he's a Nazir for only 30 days, and he counted a couple of days in the beginning, and then he became a Mesorah. And so now, at the end of a Mesorah period, part of the purification of a Mesorah is he has to shave his head and his entire body. Actually, he has to shave it twice. At the first day and the last day. So he's going to not have any hair by the time he's finished. And therefore, he's going to, so even if you count all the days in between, he's going to have to count another 30 days anyway, because he has to grow hair to complete his Nizirut. And so therefore, Rav Chisda says that when we say that you can pause the counting, but then you can restart, that when you say you have to say pause the counting and you cannot count those days because you're going to have to add more days to the count, that's only if it's short. But if it's a long Nizirut, like 100 days, and it became Mesorah towards the beginning, so then mislakna mesalkinan le, we actually count those days while he was a Mesorah. He can continue counting. There's no reason to stop counting. In essence, Rav Chisda is saying a Mesorah doesn't have to stop the counting. Right? Even though he's not Tameh Met, he's Tameh another type of Tumah. Other types of Tumah don't stop the count, and so he can continue right through. So if he was a Nazir for 100 days, no problem. He counted just fine for 10 days. He became a Mesorah. He's a Mesorah for a week, and then he has to purify for a week. Just continue counting, and then what? You're up to 21 days, 30 days. You still have another 70 days to go. Plenty of time to grow more hair. So all you need is 100 days all together, and you can keep counting right through. That's Rav Chisda's chidush. So he explains the Mishnah. When the Mishnah says don't count those days, he just means that technically you could count them, but you're going to have to add at least 30 days from the last shaving as a Mesorah. So you're not going to be able to count those days. In fact, you might not even be able to count some of the days before. Okay, that's what Rav Chisda says. Now, Mativ Rav Sherevya, Matchil umone miyad, ve'en mevatel bahen et hakodmin. So Rav Sherevya says, wait, Rav Chisda, do your words really fit into the Mishnah? They don't seem to fit in very, very well, because the Mishnah says that the Mesorah, once he's done his purification, he can continue to count immediately. On that 7th day of his purification, he goes and continues counting. And you don't have to negate any of the earlier days before he became a Mesorah. So that's what the Mishnah says. So what case is the Mishnah thinking of? If you're talking about a short Nizirut, like 30 days, well then he has to grow hair. So he's going to have to add even more days. Right? So if he was a Nazir for 10 days without incident, and then he became a Mesorah, and so now he's a Mesorah and he's dealing with that for a couple of weeks, and now he's done with that. Well, now, so let's say for 2 weeks, right? 14 days. So now, okay, you're not going to count those 14 days. So what does he have? Only 20 days left, because he had 10 days in the beginning. But 20 days is not enough to grow hair. He's going to have to be a Mesorah for 30 more days anyway to grow hair. So in effect, you're negating all of the days all the way back from the beginning. So that can't be the case the Mishnah is talking about, because the Mishnah says you continue counting and you count the first days. But this guy, if it's only short, only 30 days, if the whole thing is 30 days, and no matter when he becomes a Mesorah, he's going to have to redo all 30 days. So that can't be. Elala benizirut miruba must be talking about a long nizirut. V'katane matchil umone miyad. And yet it says you continue the count after he becomes tahor. But continuing the count means you don't count the ones in between. That goes against Rav Chisda, because Rav Chisda says if you have a long nizirut, let's say 100 days, and became a mesorah towards the beginning of it, then you can count those days while you're a mesorah. But the Mishnah doesn't say you can count. It's not talking about a case like that, because the Mishnah says you don't count the days while you're a mesorah. So one way or another, Rav Chisda, then what case is the Mishnah talking about according to you? All right, that was the challenge of Rav Sherevya. Hu motiv la vehu mefarek la. This is the best type of questioner. He asked the question and he also gave an answer. Benezirut b'at 50 yom. The answer is in a medium-sized nezirut, for example, 50 days long. He sat for 20 days. He was totally tahor, perfectly good 20 days. And then he got sara'at on the 20th day. Megalech sara'atov hadar yatib telatin yomin de Nazir. Daha itle gidul se'ad. So he has 50 days altogether. Okay, good. He did 20 days. He has 30 days left. So he became a mesorah. It doesn't matter for how long. He was tameh. He became tahor for a couple of weeks. And now he shaved his whole body on the last day of his purification from mesorah. Now he counted 20 days already. What does he have left? 30 days. Perfect amount, right? He needs 30 days to grow his hair anyway. So he starts continuing to count from that day. He had 20, and now that day is 21, and he'll get to 50 at the same time that he finishes his hair growth. That's a case where you would not be able to count the days he was a mesorah, because if you counted them, it wouldn't help, because he's still going to have to count another 30 days. So that's the answer. Because that's the answer to a case that Rav Chisda could explain that the Mishnah is talking about that type of in-between case. We'll continue with this with a quite complicated case coming up on the next daf. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'Amen.